Who's ready for year 3 of Brian Kelly at LSU? I certainly am, because it means that college football is going to start. But what's their most important game? Not their biggest game, because the biggest game on their schedule is, of course, Alabama. I mean, LSU, Bama. I don't need to tell you anything else. That's the biggest game. It's not the most important game. The most important game is October 12th, which is going to be a loaded week in college football. You're going to have Oregon, Ohio State. I think you've got Florida, Georgia that week, or Tennessee's got a big game that week. I don't remember specifically, but I do know that LSU plays Ole Miss at home. Why is that their most important game of the year? So they open with USC in Las Vegas. That's not their most important game of the year. As they look to get to the college football playoff, I think you're going to have to be 10-2. 9-3 teams will have an argument, depending on schedule, might push for it. I think the committee could get a little jumpy putting in a 9-3 team as an at-large into the 12-team playoff. Whether or not you think that's right, that was my sense of where the committee is going to come down. Maybe not. We've got new conferences with different teams and everything. Maybe they'll treat them supremely different. But if you're 9-3, I think you push for it, but probably end up coming up just short of a college football playoff spot. And certainly no more than one 9-3 team could possibly get in. But that result in the USC game is not going to define LSU's season, because after that, they're going to roll off 4 consecutive wins. They host Nicholls, they go at South Carolina, they host UCLA, they host South Alabama. I do not see them losing any of those games. That is why the Ole Miss game is so important, because after Ole Miss, they go at Arkansas, who I don't have particularly high expectations for, and LSU should win that football game. Yeah, you got a new quarterback and everything. Brian Kelly, year 3, even on the road in Fayetteville, you should win that football game. The Ole Miss game is key. Let's say they lose week 1 to USC. The importance of that Ole Miss game is avoiding the need to be perfect down the stretch when they play a bevy of tough games in order to go 10-2 and make the playoff. And if they beat USC week 1, and then you host Ole Miss and beat them in a big-time kickoff that's likely to be on national television at Tiger Stadium under the lights, then guess what? You're going to be pushing for not just a top 10 ranking in the college football playoff, which I think the first ranking comes out around that time, might be a little bit later than October 12th. You could be pushing for a top 5, because I think USC is a good team. And I know that Ole Miss is going to be a really good team. Both should be ranked in the preseason top 25. USC off an 8-5 year. I still think they should be ranked in the top 25 and are going to have at least 8 wins this year, maybe 9 or 10. But for Ole Miss, that's a game that's going to have a lot of eyeballs. And that's a team that has a tremendous amount of SEC preseason championship hype. And deservedly so. You got a returning head coach, returning quarterback. You got a great roster, good portal class, the best portal class in the country according to 24/7 Sports. That's the game for LSU right there that will define their season. Because if they lose to USC week 1 and they lose that game to Ole Miss, I do not see LSU making the playoff, because down the stretch, they have to go at Texas A&M, not a gimme, host Alabama, not easy, at Florida. If that game were at home, I wouldn't be as nervous. LSU should win, but it's at Florida. Then they host Vanderbilt. Okay, I think it's Vanderbilt. I'm sorry, Vanderbilt, but come on, let's be real here. And then they host Oklahoma. Which of those games outside of Vanderbilt after Ole Miss feel like gimme wins? I think Arkansas on the road is close to, I'm not calling it a gimme win. It's definitely a game I'd have a hard time picking against LSU. Vanderbilt at home, that's a gimme win. Every other game is entirely losable. I know that Florida's win total is low and expectations aren't that high and vibes aren't necessarily the highest, depending on who you are, with regards to Billy Napier's Florida Gators. But you got to go into the swamp. And Florida's not going to be some bad team. I don't think they're terrible. I don't think they're incapable or facing some roster deficit, the likes of which you wouldn't be able to overcome and pull an upset if things go your way. So those 4 games, I think LSU is losing at least one. Can we just agree on that? Can we establish that as a baseline? At Texas A&M, at Florida, hosting Alabama and Oklahoma. If LSU goes 4-0 in those games, they probably haven't lost a game the entire season. So if you pencil in, or I'm sorry, Sharpie in at least one loss down the stretch, I come back to the Ole Miss game. You're fighting for an SEC championship appearance if you've beaten Ole Miss, because that means you might be taking care of business everywhere else. And regardless of what happens in the USC game, you have a really, really good shot of making the college football playoff. I don't think there's pressure on Brian Kelly to make the playoff in the sense that he's on the hot seat if he doesn't get there. I think the only way Brian Kelly could put himself on the hot seat is if there's some disastrous season that none of us foresee in which LSU goes, 5-7, misses a bowl game, which I don't know how that happens. I really don't. They have a preseason win total of 9.5, according to our friends at FanDuel. Can't remember a time in which a team that had that high of a win total going into the year, even in the SEC, finished with a losing season. Maybe it's happened. Maybe there was a catastrophic injury and it's just slipping my mind right now. But at this point in time, I think LSU's base amount of wins is 8. And yeah, 8-4 would be a disappointing year for LSU. No, I no doubt about it. You might have the best offensive line in the SEC, maybe one of the best in all of college football. There are not a lot of places that can say, yeah, we have not one but 2 tackles that could very easily get drafted in the first round next year. That's a pretty great asset to have for your offense as you try and incorporate a new quarterback who does not have the most playing experience imaginable in Garrett Nussmeier, but certainly has all the talent in the world to be really good. You know what a quarterback's best friend is? A running game. You know how you get a running game? You have a good offensive line. I know, crazy concept. So I think that Ole Miss game is absolutely pivotal and could end up defining the momentum that LSU creates coming down the stretch of the season, which is not something that you can be overlooking if you're a fan of a college football team. Because I think to last year, Miami, they ended the regular season 7-5. They were 4-0 before that Georgia Tech debacle. They win at least 8, maybe even 9 games. I think those sorts of moments can have a real impact. And I think that LSU game at home, if you are able to knock off the Rebels and get revenge for last year, I tell you what, if they've beaten USC by then, suddenly you look at LSU as, hey, they feel like a lock to the playoff because they're not losing more than 2 of the games coming down the stretch. I think they're losing at least 1, but I don't think they're going to lose more than 2. I'd be surprised if all 3 of Texas A&M, Alabama, and Oklahoma knock off LSU. I'd be pretty surprised, and I bet LSU fans would be disappointed. But I like this LSU team. I don't know if I love them yet. I could get talked into it. I could be persuaded. We'll see how they perform week 1 against USC in Las Vegas, neutral site game. I think USC has a chance to win that football game. I really do. I'm not making a prediction right here, right now. That comes later and closer to the season. However, I wouldn't write off USC in that game. But if LSU comes out, makes an authoritative statement, they're favored by 6.5 points. If they win that game by 10 or more, and then they beat Ole Miss, boy, it'll be hard to not look at LSU and say, that might be a national title contender that didn't get enough buzz in the preseason. But as they say, that is why you play the games. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.